Isn't this fun? Getting that perspective from Clint of some of these teaching and learning overlays and some ideas of how to now take what you're learning and help others discover those truths from the help of the Holy Ghost. I love this. Now, as we turn our page over to chapter 4, chapters 4 and 5 kind of go together in this couplet, in this pairing, because Daniel's going to interpret another dream for Nebuchadnezzar. And this chapter ends in an interesting way. Nebuchadnezzar becomes very troubled by some of the things, and he actually seems to lose his mind for a period of time. He goes wild.
He goes crazy, but then in the end, he acknowledges the God of heaven. And what I think is interesting here is that you have this dream of a tree. Oh, have we ever heard of scriptures where people...
dreams of trees.
Dreams of trees. Now, it's a very common motif in the ancient world. Trees were symbols of luxurious bounty and sustenance and shade, and sometimes even represented divinity or divine protection. And we see this everywhere in the ancient Middle East, and we particularly see it in Nephi's story where he sees the tree. And we know that it represents, in his story, Jesus and the atonement. But what happens here? Like, a reader would say, oh, there's a tree. Well, clearly something good's going to happen. And there's this inversion where the king is essentially overthrown in his mind, that the tree represents that he will not have his sustenance until he acknowledges that everything he needs in life comes from God, including his mental sanity. So it's this really, again, if you were an ancient reader and you heard someone's gonna start talking about a tree, you're like, I know how this ends. It's like telling a story, once upon a time. We all know it ends happily ever after. But we have this unexpected plot twist that the king has to learn that the only way that the tree is of any value to him is if he chooses to trust in God, which is kind of the conclusion here.
Yeah, so now that is an example. And then you go over to chapter 5 with Nebuchadnezzar's son, Belshazzar, who takes over for his father, and he's a pretty riotous king. He's living it up here, and he has this big party with his friends, and he actually takes the golden vessels from the temple in Jerusalem that have been captured, and they're drinking wine. They're having their big party
and praising their gods.
Praising their gods with these sacred objects, and then Finger writes on the wall these words, and none of his interpreters, his astrologers, his magicians can tell him what it means. So he calls in Daniel, and he says in verse 14, I've heard of thee that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. So help me. What does this say? So the writing, if you jump over to verse 25, says, I have no idea how to pronounce it, but it's something like Mene Tekel Upharsin. And then Daniel gives him the interpretation, which is, God's numbered thy kingdom and finished it. You're weighed in the balance, and you're found wanting. And your kingdom is going to be divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So this golden head era of that Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it's coming to an end, and now we're going to come down into the chest and arm period of the silver arms and chest of the Medes and the Persians. You're going to be overthrown. And it was in that very night. Chapter 5, verse 30 says, in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius, the Median, took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So now the Medes and the Persians take over. So you're noticing that Daniel, he's had to serve in multiple kingly courts.
Yeah, he starts in Jerusalem. We don't know. Maybe he had been already started as a young youth being educated in the courts in Jerusalem. He gets transferred to Babylon. He's there for really the height and the fall of the Babylonian Empire and the rise of the Persian Empire. The Persians were pretty smart. They didn't just come in and just destroy everything. They just knocked out the king. And if you knock out the king, you win. And you simply take over the existing infrastructure. In fact, Alexander the Great did the same thing a couple hundred years later. If you knock the king out, you get the kingdom. You just keep all the bureaucratic administration and power, but you just get all the wealth. If you've ever heard of the game chess, how does it end? Checkmate. So checkmate is an old Persian word that comes from the word Shah Mat. The king is dead. So that's all you have to do. You don't have to kill everybody. In fact, you don't want to kill everybody. Just get to the king. As soon as the king is dead, Shahmat, you win. And that's what happens here.